Welcome to End-to-End Web Development, where I cover tips, tricks, and tutorials on some of my favorite languages and frameworks. My name is Ainsley, and today I will be covering the Collection-Proxy. The Collection-Proxy is a wrapper for Firestore that provides consistent collection and document-level CRUD operations. It is built to enhance your Firestore experience by creating structured documents with relationships, audit trailing, and pagination. It promotes data integrity by enforcing the use of atomic rights along with document IDs and timestamping. Follow me on this journey while I explore these features and much more. Alright guys, let's create an app called Demo1 using Vite and TypeScript. I'll cd into Demo1 and I'll run npm install. Feel free to use a package manager of your choice. Now I'll run npm run dev. And I can see app running on local hosts. So it's just a standard Vue app, and I'm going to go ahead here and open console so I can monitor any logging. Alright, so I want to open a new terminal and then cd back into Demo1. And now we're going to install Firebase and the Collection-Proxy. So now we have Firebase installed. We are going to go ahead and initialize Firebase in our app. So make sure you also install Firebase tools. If you're not sure, you can run Firebase -- version. So I can see I do have Firebase tools. And I'll go ahead and just initialize Firebase in this app. So I'm going to say yes and check for Firestore and also the emulators. I'm not going to use a default project, and I'll keep the defaults for rules and indexes. And I want to use the Firestore emulator. I'll keep the default port. We want the emulator UI, keep its default port, and I want to install the emulators now. So if I check my project here, we can see we have a Firebase JSON, and it says we have Firestore and we have the emulator UI. So we have Firebase set up. Alright guys, so next here I'm going to go ahead and pull in some configuration from a gist for the Collection-Proxy. So I'll go ahead and clone that in, and then I'll go take a look in the project. I should see this directory here. I just want to copy out a few of these files, the .env, .firebase rc, Firebase init app, and Firebase init Firestore, and we want to copy those out into the root of our project. And we can see that there's a conflict with the .firebase rc file. However, the .firebase rc from the Firebase init is empty, so we'll just go ahead and override it. Alright guys, the next thing I'm going to do here is to replace this UI with a basic form that I have. So I'm going to app.view and just replace what we have here with this default form. Just go ahead and render that. We can see that it's a form for a user where we're collecting a first name and last name, and we have a create button here that we're going to use to send that off to the database. So let's go ahead and take a look at this file. We can see that we are pulling in the config that we supplied through the gist, and all I'm doing is importing this in this file. So if you import this config in the entry point of your app, it's going to get your Collection-Proxy set up. So you only need to call this once. Once I do that, now I'm accessing collection from the Collection-Proxy, then creating an instance of the Collection-Proxy and pointing to the user's collection. I'm calling set data here because I want to have reactivity on my proxy, so I'm setting that to a reactive object, and reactive is coming from Vue. So now I can use this proxy in my component and I'll have reactivity. Using it here in my computed property, I'm checking to make sure that we have a first name and last name before the component is valid, and then I'm using that is valid on my button here to make it disabled whenever we don't have the valid information provided. So next step, I have an unmounted where I'm going out and pulling in a document with ID 1, and get document is coming from the proxy. So I'm accessing the proxy and going out and pulling in document with ID 1. And this is going to pull that in on a snapshot. So once we pull that document, we're going to be listening for changes, and whenever changes occur, that's going to update our proxy, which if we're using it in our UI, so for instance right here I'm using it to represent the first name and last name in an H3, and also to represent the ID in an H5. As the data comes in from the database, we'll have real-time updates of those fields. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So right now, because I'm going out and requesting document with ID 1, I can see that we have a log showing up in our screen here. So this is a yellow log, which means that data is coming in. So if I open it, I can see that there's an empty object because the document with ID 1 does not exist. So if I take a look into my emulator suite here, we can see that we have no documents existing right now. So I'll hop back over into this form, and we're going to enter the first name. So as I do that, I can see that we have a new log here, which is yellow. So how the Collection-Proxy works is you have an object. If it has an ID, it's going to assume that that document is connected to the database, and whenever you make changes on that, it's going to prompt it to write directly to the database. So it's going to perform an update. So because we're just starting out and we don't have a document pulled in, it's going to make a local write because it checks on the data and sees that there is no ID, so it knows that we're in creation mode. So whenever there's an orange log, it's identifying that something locally got written, and I can go and take a look at this, and I'll see that the first name got written, and I can look at the final shape of the object, which only has one property. If I go ahead and I set the last name, we see the same thing happen. If I go take a look at this log, I can see that the last name got written, and if I take a look at the final shape, we can see that both properties now exist on here. And we see that we're getting reactivity in our UI because our H3 is updating by pulling the first and last name from the proxy, right? Next, I have a H5 here that should be presenting an ID, but as I mentioned earlier, this document has not yet been created, so it does not have an ID. So currently, nothing is being represented here for the ID. And now that my document is valid, the create button becomes active. So let me clear up my console here, and I'm going to go ahead and create this document. And I can see reactivity showing up here where my button now switches to a delete button, and I see the ID showing up in my UI. Next, over here in the console, we can see we have a green log, and if I open that, I see that there's a payload. So this is showing the data that was submitted for the creation of this document. So all we provided was first name and last name, and then we see all these additional fields. So whenever using the collection proxy, it's always going to append a created at and an updated at timestamp. And these are going to be true server timestamps. So whatever time your server is set for, that's the time that's going to be reflected on these documents. So the next thing, we are injecting the ID, and this is what I was saying earlier, is once the document has an ID, it knows, or it's going to assume, that this document is connected to the database. So the moment you try to change the data, it's going to make a update to your document in Firestore, and we'll look over that in a little bit here. So we have the updated at, we have the ID, we have the created at fields that are appended to our document, and then we have this additional field here, which is the belongs to. And this is a way to attach different relationships to this document. Inside of the belongs to, the document always belongs to itself. So we see how it's showing that this document belongs to users 1. So that path of this document that we're looking at. However, if you wanted this document to belong to, say, like a company or an organization, you could represent that in here by just attaching the path to the company document or the organization document. And whenever you're querying for this document, you could use the array contains or the array contains any, and you'd pretty much be saying, find me all users where the array contains this path, and that would only return you documents for that specific company. So we're able to create documents using the collection proxy, and because I'm querying for user with document ID 1, if I refresh my page here, I'm going to see that show back up, because now it does exist in the system. I hop over into my emulator suite, I can see that user showing up, and I want to show the reactivity, so I'm going to pull this over here, and I'm going to update this document from within the emulator, and we should see that reflect in our UI here. Alright, so we update in our emulator suite, and we can see that it's updating in our H3 and also in our inputs. Go ahead and pull this back over here. So we have true reactivity happening on both ends without doing any additional work. So how simple it is to just establish a connection with a collection, and then for view purposes, because this can be used in any framework, we want to set our data to a reactive object so that we can make this Collection-Proxy reactive. And as you can see, we can just access the data using get data, and we are maintaining reactivity on this object. So right now we covered the creation, we covered how to read documents, and now I want to cover how to update documents from the UI here. So you can see we just updated the first name field, and we have a new log showing up in the system here. This time this is a cyan log, and if I take a look at it, I can see the payload being set to the first name, and it's passing along a new updated at timestamp. So I was covering this where you updating your document should, update your timestamp. So we have the created at timestamp, which shows when the document was created, and at the point of creation, created at timestamp was the same as updated at timestamp. So now that shows that the document has not changed so far. But the moment I start sending updates using the Collection-Proxy, it's going to also send along a new updated at timestamp. So this gives you the ability to identify when your document has changed and when was the last time your document changed. So we have we have audit trailing coming up in other lessons where you can capture additional information. So for instance, what the document changed from and what it changed to, along with who changed the document and what time the document was changed. So that's going to be an interesting video, so stay tuned for that. So let's go ahead and we see we update our last name field. We get the same thing happening here in our payload. We are now passing along the last name along with the updated at. And I like how it's granular to where it's only showing you the fields that are changing. So if I go ahead and do a refresh, we can see that that information has been preserved. Now I'm going to go ahead and perform a delete operation. So if I go here and say delete, I can see that document disappear, and we get a new log which is now red. And if I inspect that, we can see that it's an empty object telling us that our document no longer exists. If I hop over into the emulator, I can see that document no longer exists in here. So the next thing I want to point out is that we are querying for a user with ID 1. So if I didn't specify an ID, the proxy itself initializes with a default Firestore ID. So that ID is available, and whenever we go and get document, it's going to query using that ID. However, we don't have access, or we can't see that ID right now. So if I go ahead and create my record, I see that ID show up here now that the document is created. If I take a look in the emulators, we see that we have a new document with that ID. Go ahead and do a refresh here again, and I have no documents because a new ID has been generated. So you can use this process to just go through and create multiple users. All right, so we should have 3 users in our system now. Just go ahead and grab one of these IDs. So if I refresh, I see that my document is gone. But if I go in my UI and say I want to get the document for this ID, then I can see it show up here. And as I refresh, it's gonna still be there because I'm querying for a specific ID. So it's really nice where you can query for a document that doesn't exist and still have that context in your UI to where you can enter the information to create this document, and once it's created, that document will then start being pulled in. So now that I have that pulled in, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it and take a look in my console. We see that document is gone. So that was the CRUD operation for using the collection proxy, where we were able to create document, we were able to update fields on the document and see how the updated that timestamp got updated along with the process, and then we were able to also delete documents. So we have the ability to query for a single document, but we also can query for multiple documents. So if I went here and created a connection for users, or a proxy for users, we're pointing to the same collection, but in this case I would want to set my data not to a default or to a reactive object, but to a reactive array, because now we're going to be getting back an array of users. So if I go ahead and pull those in, I would call get documents, and it's going to do the same thing where it's going to run a snapshot and listen for all those documents in the collection. So if I do a refresh here, we should see where we're pulling in an array of users, and because we currently have 2 users in the database, we are pulling 2 users in our array here, and then this call would be for the user, which we don't have a user for that ID. So this gives us the opportunity to just create users. And as I do that, we can see our collection going up. So now we have 3 users. I'll do one more time. All right, so now we have 4 documents in here. Let's go take a look. That's great. Same thing if we delete, we can see now we're down to 3. That's it for this video, guys, but stay tuned for more amazing videos on the collection proxy, and be sure to like and subscribe, and comment if you want to see other examples or if you have a use case that you're trying to explore.